This morning, I got up early because it's been a bit of a whirlwind travel. Just got in yesterday and attended a board meeting at JAMP as my first thing that I was to do here. And so I really hadn't had much time to think about what I was going to share with you all today. So I got up this morning and started thinking about that. Then I got on the shuttle and I came over here and walked in here, and every coherent thought that I had in my head disappeared immediately. So we're going to do this on the fly because it didn't dawn on me until I got here this morning that the last time I was here was 18 months ago. It was June 2022. And my wife and I, Jenny, we were in a whirlwind. 3 days earlier, I had competed in a race on a mountaintop in South Africa and collapsed at mile 18 and had to be transported to the finish, where we discovered that Jenny had a health issue that needed to be rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, in a 2.5-hour ambulance ride. This was 3 days before we arrived here. Actually, before we arrived at this facility. The next day, got out of the hospital, I recovered from my collapse, and we decided we had enough energy to go visit all the schools that we had planted over the prior 5 years here in Zimbabwe, the 5 Matter innovation hubs, I should say, in partnership with schools, technology classrooms, where kids could have an opportunity to learn using tools that otherwise they wouldn't have available to them. And I'll get to that vision in just a bit. And we visited Tichikunda in Harare, and we visited the main camp primary school. We poured cement for a new school that we were going to build, or a new classroom we were going to build at Nichalibi School. And we went to Vic Falls Primary, and then we went on to Mosey High School, and we met this incredible young student named Tendai, and another incredible young student named Terrence. And after those 2 days of whirlwind travel, we arrived right over here, sitting inside that building. And Jenny and I and everybody else, I'm going to say especially Jenny and I, we were exhausted and overwhelmed. Just everything was out of us. And that is sometimes exactly where God wants you to be. Yeah. And I asked Q and Jeremy and a few others a question. I said, what's going to happen with Tendai and Terrence? These two individuals were a couple of the best high school students I think I had ever met anywhere. I mean, they got Tendai especially, she got the absolute, because she gave the presentation at this school, which is why I was so moved by her specifically. So what's going to happen with them? And the answer was, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with any of the students, because more than likely, they might end up, selling produce after they graduate next year. There aren't any job opportunities available for them, and they probably won't land in a university. And we sat in there thinking, we have these 5 classrooms. We just poured concrete for Nichalibi. That's going to be the 6th classroom. And what good does it do to educate all of these kids in primary school and secondary school and not have jobs available to them? And specifically jobs, and thank you, Simba, for pointing out the unfortunate situation that when people do get trained, they often leave. And so we thought, is there a way that we can take these talented young students and get them job ready and then work right here in Zimbabwe for anywhere? Because after all, the one blessing that we got out of COVID is the acceptance, at least in the technology community, that you can work from anywhere in the world. And we sat in that room right there and said, we got to do something, because we can't have these kids graduating from these schools and go on to nothing. And it was in that room, the last time I was on this property, that we dreamed up building a post-secondary campus where we would take the best of our graduates and get them job ready. 18 months ago. Q also said, look outside. He said, I have a vision for this backyard area as well. We want to build a treehouse. I was like, that's weird. And I was like, okay, but you do you, if that's what you think you got to do. I mean, think about that. That happened 18 months ago. Today, we have our treehouse. We have this event. Tomorrow, we launch the Matter Career Readiness Institute. And right now, today, Terrence and Tendai are both working for JAMF. 18 months. 8 months before that, trip, 8 months before that, Jenny and I broke ground on a new home that we're building back in the United States that was supposed to be done a year ago, and it's not done yet. Okay? That's what's happening in the United States, but here we launch a treehouse, a university, and we get high school kids job ready to work for a place in the United States. Isn't that amazing? So I wanted to share that. And the other thing, I just want to thank you all for being here. When we first got here, Jenny reminded me of a story. It's another race story. I have a lot of race stories, and none of them ever end well. Gosh, about 15 years ago, I traveled to a place I had never been before. It was in the most rural area of northern Minnesota, which is where I live in the United States Central. It borders on the border of Canada, so it's on the northern part of the United States. And on the very northern part of Minnesota, it is nothing but wilderness. And if you want to go camping and fishing up there, it takes an entire day of carrying a canoe and hiking and canoeing into the most rural area I had ever been in my life at the time. And we spent all day getting up there with a friend of mine, Bob, who happened to be a pastor of the church that I attended. We got there. It was late at night, very cold. We pitched our tent and we went inside and we slept in the middle of nowhere. And the next morning I got up, and there was going to be a little time before we went fishing, and I was training for a race at the time, and I thought, what better training could I do than to go for a swim? And I was very unfamiliar with the area, and the waters are lots of water, dark, deep, cold wilderness. And Bob thought I was crazy, and he tried to talk me out of it. And I said, I'm reasonably sure I'm going to be okay. So just let me go out, and I'll be back in about an hour. And in an hour later, I didn't come back. And as it turns out, I got extremely lost in the wilderness, in the water as I was swimming, and I could not find my way back to camp. And it was so cold outside that I knew if I got out of the water, I would likely get hypothermia on land. And there's a lot of animals up there, and I thought that probably wouldn't be good either. So I just kept swimming. And I swam basically into Canada, unknowingly. For about 3 hours, I was in the water until my body started to shut down, and I knew that I was going to drown if I didn't get out of the water. But I knew the dangers of getting out of the water. And I found a rock, and I climbed up out of the water, and I just laid on that rock. And I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be found ever, because we were in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't know where I was. And I laid on that rock for probably about 3 hours, not knowing. And hypothermia was setting in. And after that time, I looked out into the distance, and it was just blurry, but I thought I saw a canoe. And it was a canoe with 3 men in it. And they were the 3 people that I was camping with. And they saw me, and they canoed up to me. Of course, they had been looking for me out. They were no longer looking above the water. They were trying to look through the water to see if I was at the bottom. They had been out looking for 3 to 4 hours. And they came up, and I was just certain they were going to be so angry because I ruined our day of fishing. And they pulled up, and they were overjoyed. And I apologized and apologized. And I got in the boat, and they put a blanket around me as they were canoeing me back to camp. And I just said, I'm so sorry. And Pastor Bob, my friend, said, no worries, you just became sermon material next Sunday. And I went to church wondering, what theme is he going to build off of? Like, what is it going to be called? My Stupid Friend? You know, he was going to come up with something. And his theme that day, I am reminded of as I look at all of us here. And his theme was, I'll write it down, we get to do this. And he didn't tell the story of me in that sermon. He told the story of the overwhelming joy it was for him to have the opportunity to go help and rescue somebody. Oh, wow. And that's the opportunity that we all have here. We all get to run our businesses, but we have an opportunity to add a mission to our life and our business and our personal life that is so much bigger than anything that we're trying to do. We get to go out and reach some people in ways that we maybe never imagined before. I never would have imagined what would have happened over the coming 18 months, the last time I was in this very spot. What is going to happen? And there were only 3 of us in the room, 3 or 4 of us. What's going to happen 18 months from now because of everybody that's here? We get to do this. So that's kind of where I want. We don't have to do this. We get to do this. So we can all get our hearts in that spot. I also don't want to be here and preach to you all because, we have people here that founded Matter, that have done so much, things that are so much bigger than anything that I've ever been a part of. And some of you have created more from nothing than I could ever dream of as well. So I'm preaching to no one. All I'm going to do is share a little bit of my story on how I got to a spot that I look at life like this every single day. And so I'll start back. I'm most affiliated with the Matter Innovation Hubs and now the Matter Career Readiness Institute. So, where did that start? And where that started was when I was a little boy. I grew up in a small rural area of Minnesota. And while the United States is a land of abundance, the town that I grew up in was probably, I would say about, and still to this day, over 50% of the town lived in poverty. Didn't have a lot there. We didn't live near anything. And every boy grew up hoping to get a job doing whatever their dad did. And my dad was a truck driver, so I assumed that I was going to drive truck when I was older. I didn't think I had another option. And when I was 16 years old and I was being disciplined in school for screwing around because I was not a very good student, and I was forced to, it's something, I don't know if you have the same discipline here, but it's a discipline called detention. It's where they tell you you have to go sit in an empty classroom after school all by yourself, and you can't go out and do anything with your friends. That's where I was when my life was changed. And the way that my life got changed is the door of the classroom opened, and in walked a man pushing a cart. And on that cart was the first computer I had ever seen in my life. It was an Apple IIe computer. The person pushing the cart was one of my teachers, Mr. Price, and the school had just bought a new computer. It was 1983. I'd never seen one before. And so I noticed it and I thought, what? It looks like a video game, looks like an arcade game. And he threw me a book and said something to pass the time while you're in here being disciplined. And the book was called Programming in AppleSoft Basic. I didn't know what programming was. I didn't know what an apple was other than to eat, or what soft was, or what base. I didn't know what any of those things were. And I was not a good student. It made no sense throwing me that book, but he did. And I don't know if this was all orchestrated by him or not, but I started reading that book and learning how to program in detention after school. And it changed my life. I ended up being a technology entrepreneur for a 35-year career and helping create and grow a nearly 3,000 person company named Jamf, and have just been overjoyed by the opportunity that someone blessed me with. And it took me a while in life to realize what I had a chance to do. And ultimately, that thought is why I know I will be doing it for the rest of my life. Because for those of you who have ever been a part of giving, which since you're here, I assume you all have, if it's another thing that you have to do, eventually it will become secondary. Eventually the priority will fall behind the business that you have to run, because that's always going to be the most important thing, because it's crucial to your livelihood. So for me, I had to figure out a way, and I'm sorry, I'm going to get this stool out of the way here. If I had some advice about how to get involved in a mission that will last forever, for me, I had to make it personal, because I wanted to be that someone that blesses someone like me. And it was that personal connection that I had. Now you might say, what in the world, Dean, do you have in common, like me, growing up in farm town, southern Minnesota, to Terrence and Tendai, growing up here in Zimbabwe? And it was just really simple. I was a person who had never really been connected with the resources to have the opportunity to be something that I was meant to be. And it wasn't until technology got introduced to my life. And I don't know that, certainly it's not every child that's meant to do that, but we don't know until they get introduced to it, right? If they never see it, had that computer never been wheeled into that classroom, I would have never known I was a good programmer, because I didn't know what programming was. And these kids would have never known they had the gifts that they have. I mean, they're truly special. They would have never even known it if they didn't have an opportunity to use it. So every day when I think coming here, what drives me is wanting to be that someone, because we all have someone, right? None of us got to where we're at entirely on our own. Now I knew who my someone was. It was Jeff Price. Jenny and I went to a concert last week where we heard from an unbelievably gifted artist, and he was telling his story, and his story started with a scholarship to a music school. And he said, to this day, I don't know who gave me that scholarship. He didn't know who his someone was, but it was someone. And I would just encourage all of us to just be that someone for someone and make it personal and put yourself in that story. So that's kind of where it started, and I was very fortunate to have met a friend, Q, wherever he is out there. And I sat down with Q, there he is, and I told him my story. I said, is matter in education? And he was like, no, we do some stuff with healthcare and other things, but we really haven't done a lot with education. I'm like, wanna be? Because I have something that I wanna do, but it's only possible if I can find the right partner to be able to do it in the right place and the right students. And I'm just forever indebted to you saying, I don't know whether you said yes or why not or let's go or whatever your answer was, it gave me permission to step forward and say, all right, let's create something. And that was, that was only maybe 5 years ago. And here we are with 6 schools and essentially a university that's going to launch tomorrow in a 5-year period. The programming that I learned at that school eventually led to a job, and it eventually led to actually becoming a business leader. And my journey started to twist and turn a little bit. I had benefited from that someone, but I hadn't yet turned that benefit out towards others. I was very, very focused on getting that next promotion, getting to that next spot, in my career. And at one point in time, I was also blessed because the company that I worked for said, hey, we would really like to develop you as a leader. We think you should go get a leadership coach. And I found a leadership coach. His name was Fred Keel. And it's appropriate that I talk about Fred just a little bit because we lost him this past year. And he was a PhD in psychology, and he had made it his mission to connect the minds of leaders to the hearts of leaders. And somehow we got introduced, and I said, would you be my leadership coach? And he said, yes, I will. And he said, here's how we're going to get started. He goes, I need you to give me the names of everybody that you work with. I need you to give me the names of your board of directors of your boss. I need your wife's name. I need your friends' names, your brothers and sisters' names. And I said, why do you need all of these names? He goes, well, I'm going to interview all of them to find out what it's like to be on the other side of you. I was like, well, this is a work thing. Why don't I just give you the work names? And he said, well, are there two deans? You know, because it seems to me you're always the same person, so I want to talk to everybody that you interact with. And I'm going to ask them a whole bunch of questions, and I'm going to write down all their answers, and then I'm going to read it back to you. I was like, that sounds horrifying. And he was like, this is how we start. And he did that, and he created a book about 1.5 inches thick. And I'm telling you, some of the questions are the questions like, what would Dean's worst enemy say about him? There's no positive way to answer that question. So there's going to be some really terrible stuff in this book. And it took him almost 1.5 days to read the whole book back to me. And I was about halfway through my career at this time, so it was a good time to do it. And what I found and what I connected with was that I had so much drive, and that it was impossible for that drive not to eke out in every interaction that I ever had. And that drive was very, very focused on, of course, organizational success, but that it came across as if that drive was me attempting to get to the next level of achievement and how that made people feel. And when Fred was done reading this to me, he said, so is this who you want to be? It's 1.5 inches thick book. Is this who you want to be? And I was like, my goodness, no, I had someone, in my life at one point in time, I guess I want to be that someone. And he started working with me, and we worked for the next couple of years. And there was a realization. I had considered myself, a leader, as we all are. And he taught me something about leadership. I'm going to write that down as well, that I have never forgotten, and I have often quoted. And that is leadership, and I'm sorry for my handwriting, is not about attaining or obtaining power. So many people think, how often do you hear on the news, speak truth to power. That person's in a leadership position. They're in a powerful position. Becoming a leader is all about your own power. And what I learned from Fred is leadership is not about attaining power. It is about, it is about making others, I don't even know how to spell, others powerful. After all, the definition of leadership is that somebody follows you, right? Have you ever seen somebody out walking completely alone and somebody point, well, that person's a leader. Well, nobody's a leader. That person's not a leader. There's no line behind that person. There's nobody following that person. By definition, if nobody's following you, you're not a leader. You might be a manager, but you're not a leader if nobody's following you. And our roles as leaders are to get the absolute most, the best, incredible things out of the people that we lead. And one of the reasons that I devoted myself to education was because I had made it personal. The other reason that I'm devoted myself to education, and the thing that had dawned on me to really make it last is I'm going to write it this way. I had to overcome myself. Now that may seem weird, make it personal, but then overcome myself. Well, make it personal was make it meaningful to my life so that no matter what, no matter how busy the day got, I was still going to be on mission because it was so personal to me. But then I also had to overcome the things that were selfishly important to me. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be successful with our businesses. We should be successful with our businesses. As a matter of fact, the only way we can give back is if we are successful with our businesses. But sort of changing in my head why I wanted to be successful in business. That it wasn't about how much power I could attain, that it was about making others powerful. And yesterday, when I got off the plane and we went straight to the MATTER.ngo Readiness Institute, and I walked into a room. Terry, are you out there somewhere? Where's Terry? There she is, who also helped make the MATTER.ngo Readiness Institute happen. She just grabbed me and talk about drive. She's like, Dean, great to see you. I'm going to take you in this classroom and I'm going to introduce you right now. Say a few words. Okay. And we did that, and just looking at the faces of everybody in that room. And I actually gave them a message, and I heard a similar one this morning. I gave them a message that this all started because they're valuable. They are valuable individuals, people. They're valuable children of God. Okay? They have value. But what the MATTER.ngo Readiness Institute marks is a change. See, up until now, and I heard the words, who was it, Simba that said it this morning? Up until now, they have been dependent on handout. They've been dependent on somebody coming and donating funds in order for them to learn. They are viewed as valuable and therefore given to. However, to have longevity, if this is going to last forever and grow, they have to become valuable to organizations that employ them. Because an public company like Jamf, this has got a new CEO now. They are not going to keep Tendai and Terrence employed unless Terrence and Tendai produce. So the MATTER.ngo Readiness Institute is a marker in this journey to say we're going from hand out. How did the saying finish this morning? From hand out to handshake. It's going into a business relationship where it's time for them to become more valuable to the organization. And once that happens, if businesses can start tapping into a third of the world's youth right here in Africa, starting in Zimbabwe, to be able to create, and the reason why we're putting all of this investment in Zimbabwe is because once we get like an incredible amount of skill here, we don't need to fly over Americans to reach the rest of Africa. Zimbabwe will reach the rest of Africa. So we are starting here. I actually just the other day was listening to a message from our pastor in church. And with everything going on in Israel, the pastor was talking about God's selection of Israel, not just for Israel. I mean, God was very clear when he spoke to Adam, I'm going to bless all nations of the earth through you. He was selecting Israel as being, the first, not the only nation, the first nation to work through to reach all nations. And I turned to Jenny and I said, that's Zimbabwe for us. We are going into Zimbabwe to create this incredible base of skill and employment-ready individuals to one day not just improve the employment within Zimbabwe, but tap into all those statistics that Matter described earlier without having to get people on the plane to fly over the ocean. So these are two things that have motivated me. After working with Fred, I'll get to the third and then I'll wrap up. After working with Fred and that point that he made, and actually I'm going to get my iPad out. Excuse me. When Fred had asked me, are there two deans? Is there one at home, one at work? Is there one in the church? I was like, no, there's only one of me. I made a commitment. I was faithful prior to that, meaning I had faith. I believed that Jesus Christ died to forgive my sins, and he rose again to break the chains of death and sin. And I think that we all have that forgiveness available to us. But I didn't know till I started working with Fred. And who would ever thought? I didn't go out to get him as a spiritual leader. I went out to get him as a business leader. Turns out he was my personal pastor for a couple of years. I just made a decision to live my faith everywhere, right? And one of the things I decided I was going to do was I wasn't going to go to work each day until I had spent some time being grateful, thinking of others, and being in the Word. Those were the three things I was going to do. And I started keeping journals, and I would devote one page of the journal to every day of my life, every day of my work life. I decided I was going to, at least 5 days a week, I was going to do this. And so every day I would open up my journal, I'd write down a date, and then I'd write down the word thankful. And I would start my morning every day by writing down the things in that moment that I was thankful for. And then I would write down the word need, and I would write down the things that I was praying for that day with a specific focus on others, the people that I was praying for. And then I would read some of Scripture, and whatever verse jumped out at me, I would write down, and then I would journal a little bit on it, and it would be one journal page. And I kept them in actually notebooks, much like that were handed out here. We'll get you all set up with iPads maybe next year. And then I reached a point in my life that I thought, I don't do paper anymore. And so I started keeping the journal on the iPad. I'm just going to hold it up to demonstrate it. So like this is an example of one day. This was from October 11th, just a couple of weeks ago. And if I just tap on the icons, I can sit and you can see how far I'm scrolling back here. You can't see the number of pages, but it's up to like page 843. And that's when I decided I was done with paper. So I've got a lot of days of daily reflection that goes into my morning every day before I start a thing with work, just to get my heart in the right spot about what I'm thankful for, who I'm praying for, and what the Word had to say to me that day. And the reason that I jumped out here on October 11th is because there was a verse here I wanted to read. I was reading 1 John 3. And for those that don't know, John is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. John wrote one of the Gospels. He wrote 3 letters, 1 John 1, 1 John 2, 1 John 3. And then John also was gifted with a vision to be able to write Revelations. So John wrote a lot of the New Testament. He also wrote the shortest book in the entire Bible, which I think was 2 John. Or 3 John, one of the two. But he was, straight and to the point. Oh, was that Peter? Can't remember. Anyway, John wrote a lot. And in this particular, he was sometimes called the Apostle of Love because he wrote a lot about love. As a matter of fact, in 1 John 4, he referred to the word love. That was the next day, by the way, 28 times in one little section of verse. But in 1 John 3, verse 17, he wrote, if someone has enough money to live well, if someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? Now, by the world's population, I would suggest that we all live well. I mean, is there anybody that is here today by the world's standards worldwide that doesn't live well. And we, of course, around us everywhere are brothers and sisters in need. And so having every day, and that was what my reflection was on that day, it's God's love alive in me today. I can measure that by one thing. Am I helping out a brother or sister in need? And if I knew where I was going to end up giving, because I could identify that someone in my life. But when it comes to living your faith and deciding where might be that spot that becomes your passion of where you want to give, I want to, as I get ready to close here, write down something else that I have learned about your heart. And it is sometimes your gifts or your giving follows your heart. So in other words, wherever your heart is, your gifts go. So sometimes gifts follow your heart. But sometimes, and it took me a long time to realize this, your heart follows the gifts that you give. Now, what do I mean by that? You don't know where to give. You don't necessarily burn with passion for any specific area, but you just decide to give out of obedience. You know what that's gonna naturally lead to? How's that project going? Can I be introduced to people who are part of that project? You know, if you decided to jump in, for instance, in the education projects that are going on or the healthcare projects that are going on, you'll give, and then you'll ask about, and then you'll meet them, and then you'll start to know some of the people, and then you'll start to love some of the people, and then you will burn with passion for wanting to help some of those people. So a lot of times you give because you already have a heart for something, but sometimes you just give out of obedience, and God develops that love in your heart that follows. So if you don't know where it is, until you know where it is, I would encourage you to jump in somewhere and just watch what God does, not only, you know, for whoever you're giving to, but watch what God does for you. So, and it is, I literally retired from my job because my heart burns with passion now for this additional mission that is in my life. And yesterday I mentioned that I came in and I had a board meeting to attend right away, right? And of course I wrote Q ahead of time. I was like, can I attend it at the MATTER Career Readiness Institute? I mean, I figure if we're launching it tomorrow, they've got to have internet, right? And he's like, yeah, you know, we've got internet. And as it turns out, I didn't even know this when I asked, 3 other executives from Jamf are here this week because they're getting to know these students, because I met with the head of engineering for Jamf. She and I have never talked about this. I had dinner with her last night, and I asked about what she thought of the students she was meeting. She's like, I got to hire them. We got to figure out a way to hire them. And trust me, her feet are held to the fire that she has to produce. Again, she is the chief technology officer for a publicly traded company. Investors are not messing around. They don't care whether she hires out of Zimbabwe or anywhere else in the world. They want results, and she wants to hire people right here. And so she needed to attend the board meeting. And another executive, we had 4 of us that needed to attend this board meeting. And so Rodwell, who runs the IT for the MATTER Career Readiness Institute, says, I got a room for you. And we all set up, all 4 of us. We get on the Zoom meeting. It's displayed on the big TV up top. We have a wonderful camera that's capturing us all in the room. And it was a 4.5-hour meeting. Okay. There were about 15 people on the meeting, lots of content that was shared. At one point in time, the CFO of Jamf had a long presentation that he needed to give. In the middle of his presentation, where he was connecting to from his home in Minnesota, which is just across town, Zoom, which was the tool we were using, dropped him. disconnected him. And then he got reconnected. And he said, I'm sorry, my connectivity is not fast enough. I can't turn on my video. I'm just going to have to present this audio only. And the board's response, and I'm just going to be as frank as I could be, our board of directors at JAMF could care less about the philanthropic desire we have to help Zimbabwe. They care about results. And their observation yesterday was how in the world we have 4 executives connected perfectly with the best video in this entire meeting from Zimbabwe, and we can't keep our CFO on the line from across town. And we left that meeting, and I told Rodwell that story, and I thought he was going to break down and cry. We are at a spot right now where we're going from handout only to handout and handshake. And that is why I'm absolutely convinced that this program is going to last forever. And doggone it, we get to do this. So thank you very much for being here. Appreciate you giving me a little bit of time. You matter!